Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. When I hear introduction like this, I'm always reminded of a short story. Someone went to buy a parrot and asked the shop owner, how much is this parrot? And he said it's $500. He said, $500, why it is so? He said, because he knows how to use a keyboard. So he looks at the second parrot and says, how much is this? He said, 1,000. Why? This parrot knows programming. Then he goes to the third parrot and says, how much is this? He says, 2,000. And he says, what does this parrot do? He said, nothing. The only thing is that the other two parrots call him boss. I'm really very, very happy to be here for many reasons. One, I've been knowing the work of the Islamic Shura Council of Southern California, and I was very delighted to know that you have 69 members who are participating in this Shura Council. I want to thank all of you, the Islamic Shura Council of Southern California, and more so Brother Shakil, who have spent about 8 months trying to coordinate our schedules. I was very touched 2 days ago. Dr. Muzammil Siddiqui called me to say that I'm coming here, but he will not be here. He will be traveling. So we are certainly going to miss him today. As it was mentioned, I have 2 presentations. The first presentation is really focused what leaders of the communities like you need to know about endowments and how to establish one. And the second presentation will focus more what you will use with the donors to raise funds. So the next slide, why endowments, talks about the endowments, that an endowment ensures nonprofit will have resources to withstand economic variance, disaster, a loss of key funding source, may cause the nonprofit to cut back or cease operation. It also tells the public that when you have an endowment, it provides continuity, permanence, and the organization is going to be here to stay. The next slide talks about what is the concept of a Waqf. As most of you know, the endowment is basically a gift that provides an income for an institution or a person for a determined objective. And we'll talk about that, what that objective could be. Waqf is basically tying up and preserving the property in ownership of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the good of the mankind. And it is usually managed by a trustee called Mutawalli. Now, objectives of a Waqf, why we need a Waqf is to organize and institutionalize voluntary charities, which provide financial support to charity organizations, which could be a community organization, which could be educational organizations, and social organizations. Now, you can pick any of these categories to organize an endowment, and as we will talk about, we can have one endowment, but these could be sub-endowments within that endowment. The endowments do work. Now, sometimes many of us, we always feel that do endowment really work? And is there an example we can sort of look up to? Harvard University has one of the largest endowment, which is $34 billion. And last year, they provided 1/3 of their operating budget as well as financial aids from the endowment. And that's significant, 1/3 of the operating budget as well as the financial aid. I'm also aware of many other organizations who are purely funded from the endowments at this stage. It takes time to build them. It's a lot of hard work, but once you're able to accomplish, they do work and they do provide stability to the organization. Let's look at the legal characteristics of a Waqf. It's more like an artificial person. It's had its own identity. It can own property, can sue and be sued, can enter into contracts and can affirm their seal to legal documents. It has to be perpetual and irrevocable. So we cannot create an endowment and then revoke it. and it has to be forever. It's a perpetual. Unlike a corporation, Waqf can never be terminated. The person who will manage, the Matwalli, the manager, has to be honest, capable of sound judgment, can be reasonably paid, simply to manage the assets owned by the Waqf, not by the person. So the Waqf has its own ownership, and it is managed by a trustee or a group of trustees. What are the Sharia rules governing a Waqf? The legal ownership of the contributed asset, they own the assets. In a trust, in a legal American trust, the assets can be owned by the trust or by the trustee. But in a Waqf, it has to be owned by the Waqf, which is the legal entity. It should be perpetual, and it's irrevocable. It's a permanent object, could be real estate, could be movable, and some fuqaha has agreed that cash, shares, books, clothes, animals can also be accepted part of the endowment. It should have lawful and clear purpose with documentation. Mosque, school, hospital, orphanage, and whatever else you wish. Supporting general good and welfare of the community, not for personal gain. I cannot create an endowment for personal gain. It has to be for the welfare of the community. It should be managed for the beneficiaries. So if the orphanage is to benefit the orphans, it should be for the orphans. What are the conditions which will make it null and void? If anybody puts the term limits on the endowment that this will terminate in 10 years or 5 years, that condition is not accepted. Limitation on comfortable enjoyment by beneficiary. If any limitation is put on that, then that is not acceptable. Restrictions on replacing the administrator under any circumstances, even lack of performance, dishonesty. So if somebody creates an endowment and says, so and so should manage, but if that person is not performing and is dishonest and I cannot change, then that condition is not acceptable. Restrictions on replacing assets. If we say that you buy a building today and at no time this building can be replaced, even if it is no longer needed or it's destroyed or whatever else has happened or people have moved out, that is not acceptable restriction also. Fixing the fees for compensation or revenue or requiring to do anything which is haram, that condition cannot be accepted. Please note that the conditions which are listed here, if any one of those is put, those are not valid, but the endowment will remain in full force. Now, you as a community leader must be thinking of what are the steps one need to take to establish a Waqf. First of all, I would suggest that you as a community leader needs to decide, are we ready to establish an endowment in which the money will always be invested and the profits will be used for the welfare of the community. If you feel that Islamic Center or a community center is in that position, then you can call for a general body meeting, basically present this idea, the objective, need, and plan, and get a general consensus or approval of the members. It's not a formal voting, but it's a consensus, so the membership is with you. Now, next thing will be to establish a legal structure. There are several ways to do that. To start small, I would suggest that you can have a restricted fund within the existing organization, which is 501c.